Okay, great. So as Dana said, my name is Sean Fagan. I work for a firm called GK Training. We are a boutique communications training firm based in New York, and we teach four main subject areas. We teach speaking, writing, selling, and leading. And today I'm going to be focused on what we call executive presence. And that's a component of all of those other subject areas that we teach. And it's also really important for remote communication. And that may seem counterintuitive because the one thing that we are not right now is physically present with many of the people that we work with. But actually in this environment, your presence, your executive presence, is actually even more important than it is when you are face-to-face, one-on-one, or in a large group. So today we're going to be looking at presence. I'm going to give you some concrete tools to work on that. We're going to talk about what it is a little bit. We're going to do all of this in the context of this new normal, the remote communication that we're all doing so much these days. And as Dana said, we will have a formal Q&A at the end. I'll make sure that's at least 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes, because really that's where the rubber meets the road, is me trying to respond to all of the specific concerns and questions that you have now. And as Dana said, feel free to throw those questions in the chat as we go. I can only see a few of you, but while I have those few people, could you just, before we start, raise your hands if you can see my slides and me and hear me relatively well? Yeah, got some hands going up? Great. So this slide here, this is a fair question to ask, and we do get this question a fair amount. I see some hands being raised. Dana, let me know if there's something I need to deal with there. This is a fair question to ask. What is presence? It sounds like maybe an abstract concept, but for our work today and all the work that we do, when I talk about presence, I'm simply talking about the impression that we form on other people. And that is true when whether you're in front of them or whether you're talking to a camera or a microphone, the impression that you make on other people is important. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. Now, we are going to do this in the context, obviously, of remote communication. So before we get into the presence piece and the other material that I want to share three quick remote communication tips just to start off with. And these tips are we call it 3 ups: stand up, look up, and warm up. I'm going to start with stand up. I don't know if you can tell, but I am in fact standing for this webinar. In terms of, you'll see why this is the case as I go on, but in terms of particularly important high leverage communication, standing is really your best bet, even if you're on a video chat or on a phone. And I'm not suggesting that you go out and buy an expensive standing desk. I will actually show you my setup. I'm at my mom's house, and I have my computer standing on an old decommissioned desktop computer and some yearbooks from college. And I've just set those on a desk so that I am able to stand and be a little bit more physically engaged while I'm communicating with you. The second up is look up, and this is also related to your setup, which is this. I have my laptop so that the camera is at my eye level as opposed to below my eye level. And that does a number of good things. It frankly just makes you look a little bit better. A little bit higher is even better sometimes. If you're interested in more camera tips, Tom Ford, the fashion icon, actually has a really cool online video about setting up your home camera for communication, so you can check that out. So stand up, look up. I'll add a third addendum sort of on the side here, which is dress up. For some of us that are working at home, there's a lot of sweatpant time these days, which is fine. But for certain meetings or important calls, getting dressed for work is actually useful. I'm actually wearing shoes, even though I'm on carpet, because it just makes me feel a little bit more formal. And then the third up is warm up. And this gets us into the bulk of the day. This is a super important point. And I'm actually going to lead us through, all of us, however many 120 something people, I'm going to lead us through a very quick physical warm up. You can do this wherever you are, whether you're sitting or standing. If you want to stand up, that's great. And for our purposes, a warm-up just has to involve the breath and the body. So we're going to start with just a little bit of stretching. So those of you that I can see, just stretching one arm up towards the ceiling. Yes, thank you, Virginia. And then the other arm. You could open your mouth as you do this, just stretching one arm and then the other arm up towards the ceiling. Thank you. Yeah, it feels good, right? And if you find yourself yawning while you do this, oh, that's perfectly acceptable. I'm the only moderator that's ever going to encourage you to yawn. So you can now reach across to the other wall. You're just reaching a little bit, just waking up that torso a little. And your videos are all on. If I did a little digging, I could see who's doing it. Now, if you interlace your fingers like this and turn them this way and reach up that way. Oh, feel free to yawn a little bit. And then shake your hands out. You can, if you're standing, you can shake your feet out a little bit too. So that's just a quick little physical warm up. The reason the yawning is good is because it opens up your soft palate and it opens up your rib cage for your breath. So yawning is actually a perfectly acceptable warm up. And then the second part of a warm up is it has to involve the mouth a little bit, the articulators in our face, our teeth and our tongue. So I'm going to ask all, do not unmute. There are too many of you to have 100 voices in the same time. So don't unmute, but please do. We're going to do this 3 times. Slowly, slightly less slowly, and then a little faster. So we're going to lead through this on 3. We're all just going to say this tongue twister out loud together. On 3, ready? 1, 2, 3. The big black bug bit the big black bear, and the big black bear bled blue black blood. Great. One more time, a little bit faster than that on 3. 1, 2, 3. The big black bug bit the big black bear, and the big black bear bled blue black blood. One more time, as fast as you can. You're alone. Your boss is not in front of you, so you can be ridiculous right now. On 3, as fast as you can. 1, 2, 3. The big black bug bit the big black bear, and the big black bear bled blue black blood. Great. Good job. You are warmed up. Now, we encourage everyone we work with, and we work with people in all industries, from high school kids to college kids to C-suite executives, all the way up to one of the Democratic presidential candidates in the last year. And across that whole range of people, we ask them to warm up, and we get a lot of pushback. It feels silly. It can make you look silly. And one of the main pushbacks is, well, I'm not going to do that at work, right? I'm at my office. I'm not going to do that. Guess what? Everybody's at home now. Before you turn on your Zoom conference, you can do that warm up in the comfort of your bonus room or your home office or wherever you're working from. So that's pushback 1. Pushback 2 is a more reasonable pushback, which is I don't know any warm ups. And that's completely fair. And because of that, we have on our website, if you go to our website, which is gktraining.com, if you look up at the top there, there's a tab that says resources. And you can click there and there's a page full of guided warm ups that start at 30 seconds and go all the way up to 10 minutes. Full vocal and physical warm-ups, completely free, no registration or login required. So that's a great resource for you. If there's one thing that you take away from this, honestly, the biggest return on your investment is spending just a minute and a half, particularly in the morning, warming up before you're jumping on your calls or your video chats. And the reason that is the case brings me to the first foundational element of all the training that we do. And that is this: communication is a physical activity. And we often think of it as a mental one because it's about sharing our ideas, but the act of speaking to a camera or a microphone or a phone or to people in a large room, that's a physical act that involves the breath and the body, all these articulators we just warmed up a little bit. And as a result, all of our habits as communicators, the good ones and the bad ones, are physical habits. This work is much more akin to learning a musical instrument or an athletic endeavor. So the way to get better is only through the physical process of working on things physically. And I'll give us a chance to demonstrate this all together now. I want you to say this phrase out loud, just normally right now on 3, the phrase you can see on the screen: communication is a physical activity. We'll say it together on 3. 1, 2, 3. Communication is a physical activity. And now all I want you to do is plug your nose. You don't have to do anything unusual, just plug your nose and then say this same phrase out loud again on 3. 1, 2, 3. Communication is a physical activity. So I'm sure you heard that in me and in yourself. That small physical act of changing just the shape of how your face is resonating radically changes how your voice sounds. And so all the work we're doing today is about engaging with your physicality in a way that improves your communication, both how you sound and what you say. That's point 1. Communication is a physical activity. Big foundational idea number 2 that I want to share is this. It's called the virtuous cycle of good communication. Sounds a little complicated. It's not that complicated. So this is a definition of a virtuous cycle. A virtuous cycle is simply a system of interconnected inputs in which improving any one of those things tends to improve all of the other things. So this simple example from life is diet and exercise. So you start working out, you're motivated to eat a little better, you eat better, your workouts get better, you work out harder, you're more motivated to eat better. Those two things feed each other in a positive direction. And communication is the same thing. All of the things we think about as powerful communication, strong, clear eye contact, a deliberate pace of speech, comfort with pausing inside of and between ideas, expansive physical gestures, all of those things are connected. And focusing on just one of those things tends to improve all of the other ones when things are going well. And more importantly, focusing on one of those things when things are going badly tends to make things stop going badly and go in the other direction. So that's an important big idea today as we look at some of those individual components together. The other reason this is important is that there are two big buckets in terms of communication. And to also physicalize this, could you put if you're not holding your phone, if your hands are free, please put your hands in front of your face like you're holding giant binoculars. So you should be able to do that. Yeah, thank you, Dana. So if you look at the left hand, that's a C. And if you look at the right hand, that looks like the right side of a capital D. The C stands for content and the D stands for delivery. Content is what you say. Delivery is how you say it. You can put your hands down. Thank you for doing that ridiculous thing on the camera at 9 o'clock in the morning. Great. So content is what you say. Delivery is how you say it. And those two things are also connected in a virtuous cycle, meaning everyone knows that if your content is really solid, you're a huge subject matter expert, you've practiced a lot, your delivery gets better. That makes sense. What people don't necessarily know is that just focusing on the delivery actually ends up making you say smarter stuff. You sound better, sure, but also it gives your brain enough time to come up with your best material. So we're going to be focused primarily on the delivery side of things today because that's where the biggest bang for your buck is. Great. Now the way that I want to frame this is I'm going to take a sip of water out of my Baby Yoda mug. Hydration is also very important for all of this talking we're doing on phones. It's actually harder on your voice talking in a phone or to a computer than it is in person. So just know that vocal health is important and hydration is a big part of that. So I want to lead us into, I'm going to share 3 surprising things about good communication. And this is true generally, and then I'll also relate it to remote communication more specifically. The first surprising thing is this. Powerful presence, effective communication comes from using more of ourselves, not less. And this is really, really important for remote, but it's important for all business communication. I'm going to ask you a question. What's the best way to do this? I'm going to ask this question and ask you to just think of it, and then I'm just going to answer it because there's too many of you to spend a lot of time getting a volunteer. So we ask this question, who are the best communicators in the world? And people usually say politicians or actors or pastors or preachers, religious professionals, and all of that is true. But really what I'm looking for here is this. Children are incredible communicators. I have a 2-year-old who is a cutthroat, brutally effective negotiator. He is an incredible storyteller, and he probably only knows 75 words, right? Kids are incredible communicators because they use the full range of their physical and vocal expressiveness to get their message across. And we get into professional settings, particularly in remote settings, and we think that professional communication means narrowing a range of expressiveness in order to convey authority and gravitas, and we tend to make ourselves smaller and our communication smaller, particularly we're talking to phones and we get really, really small because we're just talking to a phone. And what you're doing in that, it feels like you're making yourself safe, but really what you're doing is robbing yourself of tons of expressive potential. So the first point to make for all communication, and here on remote in particular, is that I would encourage everyone to expand the range of expressiveness that you're comfortable using. I'm not suggesting you talk to your boss like you're a 3-year-old, but every single person I've worked with in the last 10 years could stand to be slightly 10, 15, 20% more expressive. And one way to look at that concretely is this. We have these 5 Ps of vocal variety. You'll see them down there at the bottom listed there. Pace is fast and slow. Pitch is high and low. Pause is musical rests. Power is loud and soft. And placement is actually what we experimented with at the beginning. That's where the voice resonates in the body. So here the voice is resonating mostly in my nose. Here it's resonating more in my chest. So this is a concrete way to look at the elements of what we call vocal variety and to start to pick them apart and improve them. We did this study at Columbia University. Don't worry, you don't have to read that. That's the whole paper. These are the important takeaways. And this was a study about the impression that political speakers made on an audience. And I'll just read this out loud for you all so you don't have to strain your eyes to read it. The findings were this: deliberate pauses can heighten the impression of the speaker's credibility and gravitas. Greater pitch variation, intonation, leads speakers to be judged as more thoughtful, rational, and intelligent. It gives rise to a more favorable impression of the speaker. Studies of vocal volume or power find that staying at a typical speaking volume is less persuasive than making periodic shifts to high volume or lower volume. And placement of resonance in the throat and chest makes a voice more attractive. So those are some concrete takeaways, but this is an academic way to look at it, but we do this all the time naturally. This is how we communicate meaning in life using these 5 Ps. So I'll give you a couple of examples to think about. One is this: if you do have kids, think about the way that you read a Dr. Seuss book to your kid and how much variety in all of these areas you would use to communicate the events of the story. You can bring a little bit more of that sensibility into your business communication. Another way to think about it, again, using the kid example, if, for example, my child had gotten a hold of an expensive phone and I was trying to get them to not pay attention to it, I would use these 5 Ps to do that, to get them interested in something else. Do you want this thing or this thing? We would all do that naturally in the moment. So you have access to all of these things. My guess is that you're probably not using them as well as you could be when you're communicating professionally. And when we get to the end of this, I'll give you some concrete tools around this, and we can also deal with it in the Q&A. So if one of these things feels particularly of interest or challenging to you, note that down and we'll address it at the end of the session. Surprise number 2. Presence, effective communication, comes from being focused on the other person. This can be particularly challenging in the realm of remote communication because people aren't in front of us. We're talking to these little cameras and we're talking into phones. But if you think about instances in your life when you've communicated one-on-one with someone in a very, very, very high stakes, important situation, a dear friend who's going through a divorce, or even thinking about giving a tourist directions, or explaining something really difficult to a child, using your imagination a little bit more. If you were a caveman trying to tell your fellow caveman where that saber-toothed tiger was, in all of those instances, how do you think your eye contact would be? It would be great. How much variety and pitch and power would you use? A lot. How would you listen? Hello? Yeah? Nope. Mute, unmute. Okay, great. That's fine. In all of those situations, your communication would naturally be at a very high level. And when we get in professional settings, we often put the focus on ourselves and think that we have to be perfect, and we rob ourselves of a lot of that natural communication ability. This is particularly true here. You probably noticed me. I am occasionally looking to the right because I can see myself there, and I'm making sure that I'm framed and that my lighting is okay and all of that so that you can see me, but it's also making me even more focused on myself. So I have to really work to push through that and make sure that I'm trying to reach through this camera to all of you. That brings me to another point, particularly important for remote, on the side of this being focused on other people, which is an idea of transparency. And I want to share this with you today. This is, I'm sure that you're having this experience. Several years ago, there was a BBC commentator who became internet famous as BBC Dad because his kids came into his office. I don't know if you saw that. I'm sure that you're having that experience happen with you. We're all living in these and working in these interesting times. When things go pear-shaped or sideways or less than perfectly, we are almost always better served by just acknowledging what is actually happening. And that can be a very powerful tool to get to a point where you feel like a mistake is not a mistake. And we do this in life all of the time. If you gave a friend wrong directions and realized that you would never just stop and say, oh gosh, I hope they find their way. You'd say, you know what, let me go back a minute. I gave you the wrong name of the street. You actually need to go down to Waterford, not Waterman. We do this all the time in those one-on-one communications. And then at work, we feel like we have to be perfect, or we're on a camera, we feel like we have to be perfect, and this goes away a little bit. But transparency is really, really your friend. You cannot go too far. Well, you can almost never go too far with this. And it works for a number of reasons. I'll go through them. First, it shows spontaneity, particularly when we are not physically present. Reminding people that we are existing in the same time is really useful. Secondly, it shows trustworthiness. It actually increases your credibility. It doesn't dent your credibility. It shows authenticity. And more importantly for our current point is it takes the focus off of your own performance and it puts it on the most important person in the interaction, which is the other person and their experience and the fact that they're the most important person. So in terms of a concrete tool, I'm going to give you 3 F's you can think about in terms of transparency: fake it, feature it, fix it. The first one is fake it. So that's on purpose. I'm not suggesting that every time something goes slightly awry that you raise your hand and say, oh no, everything's wrong. Sometimes things go sideways and there's no threat to your ability to communicate your message. And in that case, you can just let it go by. For example, a cat could walk past my feet right now and you would never know. If that didn't throw me off, then that's no big deal. Don't mention it. But if the cat arrives in the frame, then you have a couple of good options, right? The first is feature it, and that looks like this. Oh, this is my cat, Bean. He's one of my coworkers now, so he's pretty quiet. He's a pretty good coworker. I'm just gonna let him sit here on my shoulder and continue on with my slide deck. That would be featuring the thing that has happened. Fixing it would look like this. Oh my gosh, my cat is always on my computer. Give me 3 seconds. I'm gonna put him out of the room and come back. So when something goes slightly awry, you have these 3 good options for that. And this is almost foolproof. The only instance in which this is not useful is if it threatens to waste the other person's time. So if the featuring it or the fixing it is taking so long that there's a lot of dead air, that actually is deadly. So be aware of that in this remote communication world. All right. Surprising thing number 3, you do not need to feel blank in order to project blank. Could you all just actually in this moment, just type in the chat what you think would be a decent answer to that question? Let's see, where's my chat? Where's my chat at? All right, Dana, could you unmute yourself and tell me what kind of answers you're seeing?
Yes. Confidence, lots of confidence.
Confidence. How did I know? This is not a software trick that Dana and I played. I can populate lines because every audience we've ever done this for a decade, all over the world, in all different industries, all different experience levels, this is what people say. I want to feel more confident. I just want to project confidence. I want to feel more confident. And I feel the same way. I want to feel more confident more of the time too. That's a fair way to feel. As a communications coach, there's very little that I can do to actually affect how you feel inside. Our feelings are fickle. Some days we feel great and we do a good job. Some days we feel terrible, we do a bad job. And it's hard to say when that's going to be. So as an educator and a coach, I'm less interested in how you feel and more interested in giving you some concrete things that you can do, you can actually do and focus on in order to perform well no matter how you feel. Which brings us to the actual kinesthetic learning portion of the time, and then we'll get into a Q&A. Yeah, this is timing out pretty well. So we've developed over the course of a decade a whole suite of kinesthetic tools that help people with various communication issues. You can see a bunch of them here. I may demonstrate some of these when we get into the Q&A, depending on what those questions are. But I want to share this idea, which is embodied cognition. It's a fancy way of talking about kinesthetic learning. And basically all it means is that when we engage our body physically to learn something, it changes the way that we learn it. And if you remember back to communication being a physical activity, the best way to get better as a communicator is by doing physical things while you're doing it to ingrain new muscle memory habits. So I'm going to share with you one drill today that's very easy to do on the phone or on a call, and that is useful for a number of different things. Generally, it's useful for eliminating filler language. It's also good for pace of speech. It essentially is designed to increase what we call linguistic precision. And I will demonstrate it as best I can with this camera setup, and then we'll all have an opportunity to do it together. And then we'll do some Q&A, and then I'll wrap up. All right, so this drill is unimaginatively called finger walking, and it looks like this. As you share one thought, one idea, one sentence, you're going to walk your fingers across a table. This could be the table in front of you, to the side. You can do it in the air if you like. And all you're trying to do is match the choosing of each word to your fingers walking. Now, to be clear, this is not robot walking one syllable per finger. You're simply walking your ideas across the table with as much deliberateness and precision as you can. So everyone, put your hand up so I can see you got a couple of fingers, and then pick a surface near you. And I'm going to ask you a big, juicy, open-ended question. And I want you to take just 30 seconds to respond to this question while doing the finger walking drill across your table. Okay, so get ready for that. The big, juicy question is, what has been the most interesting aspect of the increase in the amount of remote communication that you've had to do in your particular line of work? And I'll just sit here and listen. I'll give you 30 seconds to respond to that.
I am learning to use remote for communications with friends.
Great, so that's about 30 seconds. Now that, when I first introduce that drill to people, their response usually breaks one of two ways. The first way is a huge aha moment. Like, that was incredible. I said 0 ums. I used really interesting words. That pace of speech felt really good to me. Thank you. The other response is, that was horrible. That felt really weird and stilted. I didn't say anything interesting and I hated it. Both of those are valid responses. If it was the latter response for you, what I'm essentially doing is, it's a kind of resistance training. So I'm asking you to do something physical while you communicate to interrupt an old habit and potentially start to build a new habit. So if that felt good to you, awesome. If that felt terrible to you, also completely fine. That's a really natural response. And in an individual coaching or an in-person session, we would work through that difficulty. And maybe we can do that now. So that's a little bit of around executive presence in this remote context. We have 15 minutes left in the webinar, so that's about 10 minutes or so for Q&A. And then I know there's a feedback piece that you all do that Dana has told you about or will run at the end. So why don't we open this up to some Q&A, and I'll answer your direct, specific questions to the best of my ability.
I had a couple questions about links to resources. So in particular, the links to warm-ups and the 5 Ps paper. Would we be able to maybe post those on the course page later?
Absolutely. I'll send you the link to the remotes, and I'll send you the specifics from that 5 Ps. Absolutely. That's no problem.
Cool. I could also share those in the chat. Sorry, I'm just getting them now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jill has a large group interview tomorrow. Do you have any tips for interviews via Zoom?
Yes. Are you being interviewed? Or you're, just ask a clarifying question, are you interviewing people or you're being interviewed?
Was not specified. Jill, do you want to unmute real quick?
Yeah, and that's fine. If people have questions and you want to unmute them and have them just talk, that's also totally fine.
Yes, can you hear me now?
I can, Jill.
Okay, I am being interviewed tomorrow with a large group at a community college level for a state-funded grant. And I assume that I will have participants interviewing me from the community college level, the state that I live in, as well as the school districts that are going to be involved with the grant. And so I guess I just wondered, it's my first Zoom interview. I wondered, obviously I've heard you say to look at the camera, don't focus on me. And I've heard you say to make sure I do my vocal warm-ups and that I'm ready to speak. But are there any other tips or tricks that I can use tomorrow?
Sure. Let me ask you a couple of clarifying questions. First is, so you will be on a group of people that are being interviewed as a group?
Yes, I submitted an application and then I made it through the process to be one of the few that are going to have a Zoom interview.
I
And
see.
then I have been sent a link to join the Zoom interview tomorrow at a particular time. And so I guess my fear is what I understand about communicating and talking slow, projecting my voice. I've been practicing a little bit with a friend so that I'm thinking before I'm answering, which is
Yes.
more difficult in Zoom. But one thing that I guess I'm a little concerned is if I don't hear a question, since there are so many participants, what is the protocol or etiquette for asking for another go at hearing a question?
That's a great specific question. And for my money, you can't go too far with being transparent and narrating what's happening. So in this particular example, you're essentially saying there's the fear of the questions stop, right? And there's just silence. And to be able to simply narrate that and say, I'm not hearing anyone talking. I just want to make sure, are there any other questions? Please feel free to speak up and I'll answer that question. To just narrate through what's happening rather than trying to pretend it's not happening, or B, anyone to just clearly state, I'm not hearing any other questions. If there are any, I would be happy to answer them. Does anyone else want to ask a question? And then when the important thing with asking questions in remote is that there is a real tendency to self-answer or to continue asking a question that goes on and on and on. It's difficult to stop. So while you can actually practice this, I wouldn't do it all on the Zoom call, but asking a question that looks like, I can't hear anyone talking. Are there any other questions? And then drawing a question in the air, a question mark in the air to physicalize that pause. And it can feel uncomfortable, but tolerating that silence and waiting for someone else to talk is really your best bet.
Okay, thank you. And then are there any other tips of, should I have a very basic background?
Oh yeah, I should have gone over those at the beginning. This is good for everyone. So some basic tips just about setup is, so lighting is really important. The main thing is you don't want to have a light behind you, right? Because then I become this strange silhouette person. I actually have this set up in my mom's bonus room. So I'm facing the window. Natural light is really, really great. So if you can have some natural light coming towards your face from behind your computer, that's really useful. I also have another light source on over there to just fill in a little bit. So spending some time beforehand working on your lighting in particular is useful. The second thing about background is I'm not a huge fan of a completely neutral background. I've seen some people that I've been in Zoom meetings with who are trying to pretend that they're not in their house. And so they're finding like a blank white wall in a closet or somewhere, and it feels very strange to me. If you've watched any of the late night shows, some of them are doing that, and I think it's really bad. So I think a little bit of background is useful. Frankly, my background right now is a little bit too busy. I think Dana's background right now is actually quite good. There's like one graphic thing in the back that is a little bit interesting. I can tell that she's in an actual space. So I would do it so it feels like, to just embrace that you're at home. So not too busy, not in front of a china cabinet, but definitely something graphic in the background.
Okay, and then I prepared some slides to go with this interview. Will Zoom always allow me? I know if I'm a host to a Zoom meeting with my students, I can share a slide, but if I'm a participant, can I share a slide?
Dana might want to chime in too. There is a setting in Zoom that will allow anyone to share. So you should check with the people who are doing the interview in advance. And again, transparently say, I want to share some slides with you. Can we set it up so that I have permission to share in the meeting? And then when you get there at the top, before anything starts, to acknowledge that and say, just want to make sure we're set up so that I can share these slides. Do you want to take a second and test that?
I see. And then my final question, well, actually I have two. One, can you hear me decently well?
Yep. Great.
Okay. And then my final question, and thank you to everyone listening. When we begin, I assume I will be in a waiting room setting, but if I'm not, once I join in the group, that seems like that will be awkward. Should I smile and wave? Because we're not handshaking. So how do you start in a situation like that?
We actually got a few other questions from in the chat about how to best engage the audience at the beginning, how to kind of break the ice on an executive level.
Yeah, that's fair. And we had that experience today. We were all kind of hanging out in mute silence in our various rooms for 10 minutes today. So a couple of things about that is I would avoid getting there too early, right? And that's true of an in-person meeting too. Like you're there for a long time and everyone's having to vamp. There's a couple of things I might suggest. One is you can join the meeting without video and audio, which then, for example, I'm just seeing your name. So that's a way to acknowledge that you're there, but you can control the beginning of the interaction a little bit. So that would be one tip. If you're hosting a meeting, again, it's about transparency, to just get the ball rolling and say, we've got 7 minutes left until we officially meet. We're waiting for 4 more people. If we want to have a chat now, feel free to leave your microphone and your Zoom on and we can talk about X, Y, and Z. But if you don't want to do that, no pressure, just mute yourself, put your name up, and I'll get back to you when the meeting's ready to start. So just being really transparent about those things, I think, is also useful.
Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate the tip.
Absolutely. Good luck. We hope you get it. Good luck.
Thank you.
We had a couple questions that were kind of related. One is, how do you slow down if you tend to be a fast talker? And also about filler words like I think they might be related, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's all related. So that's good. Let's talk about, so the filler language, that finger walking drill, if you do it rigorously, you can do that on the phone, by the way, obviously on a conference call. That tends to have the effect of reducing filler language because it's sort of difficult to say when you're moving your fingers. So that would be one way. In terms of pace of speech, there's a couple of things you can do. Again, the point of all of the training we do is you need to practice this in a relatively low stakes way with some regularity to develop a little bit of muscle memory so that in the moment when you feel like you're speeding up, I'm also a fast talker, you have some physical tools to notice it and arrest it a little bit and step back. So a good general tool on working on pausing, which tends to have this extra effect of slowing you down, is using some Legos, or you can also do this drill with Post-it notes. If you have kids, I know these are Duplos. You probably have Duplos if you have small children. You definitely have Post-its if you're working in the world. So you can do this drill with either. And the drill looks like this. So there's one Lego that is the foundation block, and that just hangs out here. And then each of the other Legos is a single sentence. So you can do this on a phone call, or like Dr. Jill, if you're practicing, you can do this while you practice. And it looks like this. In silence, you pick up one Lego and share one sentence. Talk, 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 talk. In silence, you click it in place. Talk, 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 talk. Talk, talk, talk. Talk. What that does is it gives you a physical experience of what it's like to pause. And when we pause, we cannot be talking because we're pausing. And generally what we do is we take a breath in, and those two things together, not only does it break up your message in a way that is useful to the audience, gives your brain time to think of what you want to say, but it also tends to slow us down because we tend to speak more quickly when we start to run out of breath. So having more breath tends to slow you down. So practicing that in low stakes settings on calls will give you an experience of pausing and breathing, which can be really helpful for pace of speech. I find it all the time. I get excited or nervous and I start to talk fast and I just have to take a breath. And when I do that, I slow down. Anything else? What else, Dana?
We have
Did
some
I answer
questions.
the question? Yeah, there's filler and pace.
Yeah, let's see. Who was that? I guess if it was your question and it wasn't answered, let me know. um, I have a few questions about video or not. Is it rude to not have your video? Is having a professional headshot instead an acceptable alternative? Do you have any tips on that?
Yeah, I'm harping on this a lot today, but to a certain extent, I feel like that should be discussed in advance, that the person who's running the meeting has some responsibility to set that agenda. If that agenda hasn't been set for me, I prefer actual video. I find it relatively strange to be talking to someone's headshot. I actually prefer just the black screen with the name to the professional headshot. That's just my preference. It feels a little weird talking to a picture. It feels less weird talking to someone's name. If you're going to do that and you don't know what the etiquette or the protocol is, again, to be transparent at the beginning, to just say, I'm joining without video for XYZ reason. I hope that's okay. To just take care of that at the beginning of the call. But really, if you're running meetings, it's good to set that expectation as the host of the meeting.
The person who asked about slowing down said that was very helpful. So just wanted to share that. Someone asked, how do you get over the weirdness of being in an empty room and talking to people? I experienced that as well, where it's kind of hard to get up your energy to talk to a group of people when really you're just alone in your room. Do you have any?
Yeah, so standing up really helps. I can't go far enough in that direction. Standing up, it just makes you feel, if you were in a room full of 40 people, you would stand up most likely. So that helps with that. There's also a dumb, but I like it, little trick of, you can take a Post-it. So there's a camera that you're talking to, right? There's a light to the side of it. So that's eye contact in this world is actually looking at that camera. And you can take a Post-it, make it smaller, and put it next to the camera. And you can put a little face on it, a little drawing, a picture of your pet, so that there are people down here, right? You're relating to them. And then there's this camera, and this little Post-it is just a reminder, like, oh, there's my toddler. I should smile a little bit. I should be engaging like I'm talking to that person. A little bit of a trick is just to put a face near the camera. You can even, and I've done this, you can put pictures of people around the room. So it feels like you don't look at them because that feels a little weird, but just having the sense of more of an audience, that trick can, again, give you this physical experience of what that's like. Anything else, Dana?
Yeah, one last question, I guess, before we do the feedback demo. Do you have any favorite icebreakers?
Favorite icebreakers? That's a great question. You know what? I haven't really thought about it, but my icebreaker is generally sports, just because I feel like that tends to be a fairly safe area of discussion, but there are no sports right now, which is kind of interesting. That's it. Actually, let me think about that and talk to some of my colleagues. I don't have a solid answer for you on that, but that's a really good question, because in that initial moment of being on the video, what do we say? So maybe some of your colleagues out there in the participant would have some recommendations of icebreakers too. Throw it up in the chat.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for all your questions. I'm sorry if there were some that I didn't get to. I tried to kind of group them as they were related.